In the quiet town of Ravenswood, nestled between ancient forests and forgotten graves, there stood a mansion of macabre reputation known as Blackthorn Manor. The history of the manor was shrouded in mystery, its imposing presence casting a long shadow over the entire town. Locals spoke of eerie happenings and a dark legacy passed down through generations, making the mansion the stuff of chilling legends. The tale began with the arrival of young Eliza Wainwright, a distant relative of the Blackthorn family, who had lived in the mansion for generations. Eliza had inherited the mansion following the sudden and tragic death of her parents. Unbeknownst to her, the inheritance was more than just a grandiose house. It was a descent into the depths of darkness that she could scarcely fathom. Eliza arrived at Blackthorn Manor on a dreary afternoon, greeted by the cawing of ravens perched ominously on the gnarled trees surrounding the property. The mansion, with its ivy-clad facade and imposing wrought-iron gates, stood like a sentinel to an ancient realm. She couldn't help but feel a shiver crawl down her spine as she crossed the threshold. The interior of Blackthorn Manor was as haunting as its exterior. Dust-covered furniture, faded tapestries, and creaking floorboards greeted Eliza, along with an unsettling silence that seemed to permeate the very walls. In the parlor, she discovered a portrait of a family, the Blackthorns, whose eyes seemed to follow her as she moved. The eyes of their portraits were cold and lifeless, like mirrors reflecting the darkness of the mansion itself. Her exploration led her to the library, an immense chamber with towering shelves filled with books that seemed to be written in long-forgotten languages. One particular tome, bound in cracked leather and adorned with arcane symbols, caught her eye. Eliza, a scholar with an insatiable curiosity, couldn't resist the urge to delve into its contents. The pages were filled with incantations, dark rituals, and the unspeakable lore of the Blackthorn family. As she read, Eliza began to experience unsettling phenomena. Strange sounds echoed through the manor, like whispers in the dark. Shadows moved in the corners of her vision, and unexplained drafts of cold air sent chills down her spine. She felt a growing unease, as if the house itself were a malevolent entity, reacting to her intrusion into its secrets. Each night, Eliza was plagued by nightmares. She dreamt of a shadowy figure that beckoned her deeper into the mansion. In her dreams, she followed the figure through secret passages and hidden chambers, each more foreboding than the last. Her waking hours became consumed by an obsession with uncovering the mansion's darkest secrets. One evening, Eliza discovered a hidden doorway behind a bookcase in the library. It led to a subterranean chamber, illuminated only by a single flickering candle. The walls were adorned with bizarre symbols, and in the center of the room lay an old, dusty chest. She approached it with trepidation, and, upon opening it, found a collection of relics, each more ominous than the last. One of these relics was a small, ornate mirror with a tarnished frame. Eliza couldn't tear her gaze away from it. It seemed to pull her in, drawing her reflection into a realm that was not her own. When she touched the glass, she felt a cold, bony hand grasp hers from the other side. Panicking, she withdrew her hand and fled the chamber. As the days passed, the mansion's malevolence grew. Eliza felt like a puppet, compelled to investigate the relics and incantations she had found. Her dreams became increasingly vivid, the shadowy figure more insistent. It whispered ancient curses and promised her power beyond imagination, but at a price she could never fathom. One stormy night, Eliza found herself standing before the mirror, her reflection no longer her own but a grotesque, withered version of herself. The room darkened, and the shadowy figure manifested beside her, its eyes filled with malevolence. It reached out and touched her forehead, sending a searing pain through her skull. Eliza's consciousness was torn from her body, drawn into the mirror's twisted realm. She now existed as a mere specter, trapped in a world of shadows and suffering, forever a part of the cursed inheritance of Blackthorn Manor. The townsfolk of Ravenswood watched in horror as the mansion crumbled into ruin, its dark legacy finally laid to rest. Blackthorn Manor became a place of dread, its name whispered only in fearful tales and warnings to the curious. And in the mirror, in that shadowed realm beyond the living, Eliza Wainwright's ghostly figure would forever be trapped, her reflection a stark reminder of the sinister inheritance that consumed her soul and eternally darkened the history of Blackthorn Manor. In the heart of the isolated town of Harrowville, there stood a dilapidated sanatorium, long abandoned and forgotten by the world. Its ominous presence loomed over the town like a specter of the past, casting an eerie pallor over the once thriving community. For years, the townspeople whispered tales of the sanatorium, of the dark history it concealed, and the tormented souls it housed. The sanatorium was known as Harrowville Asylum, a place where the mentally afflicted were sent to be hidden from society. In the early 20th century, it had been a grim fortress of despair, a house of horrors for those who suffered from ailments of the mind. Patients disappeared behind its imposing gates, never to be seen again. The story unfolds with the arrival of Dr. Emily Walker, a psychiatrist who had recently relocated to Harrowville. She was drawn to the town by a sense of duty and a desire to make a difference in the lives of those in need. Unbeknownst to her, the sanatorium would soon become the epicenter of her darkest nightmares. Dr. Walker's intention was to reopen the abandoned facility as a modern psychiatric clinic, a place of healing and hope for the mentally afflicted. But as she set foot inside the crumbling structure, she was immediately struck by an overwhelming feeling of dread. The sanatorium was a cavernous labyrinth of crumbling walls, shadowy corridors, and faded memories of pain and suffering. Her staff consisted of a small team of nurses, orderlies, and support staff, all equally uneasy about the decision to revive the cursed place. Despite their apprehension, they rallied around the vision of transforming the forsaken building into a beacon of compassion and recovery. As renovations began, the sanatorium revealed its sinister secrets. Hidden chambers were uncovered, each filled with personal artifacts, drawings, and journals of long-forgotten patients. The writing spoke of torment, despair, and the presence of malevolent spirits that haunted the residents' every step. One particular discovery sent chills down Dr. Walker's spine. It was a journal written by a patient named Samuel Blackwood, who had been confined to the sanatorium in the 1920s. His entries chronicled a descent into madness, haunted by visions of a sinister figure known as the Pale Man, a spectral entity that preyed on the vulnerable. As Dr. Walker delved deeper into the journal, she realized that the descriptions of the Pale Man bore a striking resemblance to the apparitions reported by her staff. They claimed to have seen a tall, emaciated figure with long, bony fingers and hollow, soulless eyes lurking in the shadows of the sanatorium's corridors. Despite the mounting unease, Dr. Walker remained resolute in her mission to heal and give solace to those in her care. However, as more patients arrived at Harrowville Asylum, it became increasingly clear that something was terribly wrong. The mentally ill residents began to exhibit erratic behavior, whispering about the return of the Pale Man and the malevolent spirits that tormented them. Dr. Walker's staff reported strange occurrences, objects moving on their own, disembodied whispers, and the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. One nurse even claimed to have been physically assaulted by an unseen force, leaving her with deep bruises and a profound sense of terror. One fateful night, as a storm raged outside, Dr. Walker made her way to the basement, guided by an unshakable feeling that the answers to the sanatorium's dark history lay hidden there. In the dim light of her lantern, she stumbled upon a hidden chamber, its walls covered in deranged etchings and drawings of the Pale Man. As she examined the drawings, she felt a cold hand on her shoulder. She turned to find herself face to face with the dreaded entity. The Pale Man's elongated fingers reached for her throat, squeezing the life from her. She struggled to breathe, her vision fading, but as her consciousness waned, the entity released its grip and vanished into the darkness. Gasping for air, Dr. Walker fled the basement, vowing to confront the sinister force that had taken hold of the sanatorium. She gathered her staff and informed them of the malevolent spirit that plagued the facility, imploring them to stay and face the entity head-on. The staff, though terrified, rallied behind Dr. Walker's resolve. They devised a plan to perform a ritual of cleansing and exorcism, believing it was the only way to rid the sanatorium of the malevolent presence that had tormented it for decades. As the group gathered in the basement, the storm outside intensified, its fury echoing the tumult within the sanatorium. Dr. Walker recited incantations, beseeching the spirits to release their hold on the place and its unfortunate residents. The pale man materialized, its shadowy form writhing in agony as the ritual's power began to take hold. With a final desperate wail, the pale man dissipated into the ether, and the oppressive atmosphere in the sanatorium lifted. It was over, and the tormented souls that had been held captive were finally freed from their eternal torment. The once foreboding Harrowville Asylum now stood cleansed and empty, a stark reminder of the darkness that could take root within the human mind and the places that housed it. Dr. Emily Walker and her staff had faced the malevolent spirits that haunted the sanatorium, and they had prevailed. The town of Harrowville, now freed from the curse that had plagued it for generations, would forever remember the brave souls who had dared to confront the horrors of the past and bring light to the darkest corners of the human psyche. The sanatorium, no longer a place of dread, remained silent and abandoned, its history now a cautionary tale for those who ventured too close to the abyss of madness.